Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on law firm cash flow trends with BigHand. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give everyone a chance to come in and make yourself comfortable. I'll do some introductions in a minute, but very much welcome if you're listening live or if you're listening on the recording. It's good to be with you, however you're listening to us. So we're talking with BigHand and Iridium, and we're looking at the key findings from BigHand's legal cash flow report. We're presenting the data gathered from over 800 senior finance professionals, and I'm about to introduce our panel. So I'm joined by Rob Stote, who is Managing Director for BigHand Profitability Products. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Helen, how are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. And Tom Jones, who is founder and CEO of Iridium, which BigHand acquired in February. Hi, Tom.
Always a pleasure, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So we've done this a million times, but if you enable the chat function, please do say who you are, where you're listening in from. We hope if you're listening live that this is going to be interactive. So what's going to happen is the guys are going to run through some key points of the report, which I'll introduce in a minute. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. Hi, Tegan. So ask questions at any time, because the idea is one of the reasons for doing this live is so that we can do a dive into some of the findings, and the guys are very happy to take your questions. We're going to be looking at data visibility, some of the key. The BigHand have done a really good job with this report. It's got I think I just mentioned 800 people engaged with it, 800 senior finance professionals. And we're going to be discussing things like data visibility for partners and associates, because unless there's better education and visibility around billing and profitability, your efforts to improve the WIP to cash cycle will only go so far. And the guys are going to go through some findings from that report. We'll also be looking at profit leakage. So BigHand's report research takes a deep dive into what areas of the billing cycle leak profit. We're going to be looking at collections and how to improve your collections. So 54% of law firms experience bill write-offs, and it's taken longer for clients to settle their bill since the pandemic. So the guys are going to go through some of the findings of the report in terms of how to improve your collections. And we're also going to be looking at some new roles, so new finance roles, because the report shows that there's been an uptick in the number of law firms hiring financial analysts and people who can make data work harder for you effectively. So the guys are again going to present some of the key findings. I'm going to jump in with questions, but I think really, unless you want to do more in the way of introductions, it's over to you guys.
Well, I think you covered it, Carolyn. That's fantastic. I'll be running the slides as we go through this, and as Carolyn said, please pop stuff into the chat as we go through this presentation. I'm going to kick this off with a quick introduction of who BigHand is, and then I'll turn it to Tom to talk a little bit about Iridium. So for those who are joining us who don't know who BigHand are, BigHand's been in the legal industry for since about '99, so quite a while now, and we really focus on sort of the productivity, and a lot of our offerings are really centered on the productivity and making firms more productive and making them more efficient. And we really focus on 4 key areas. Now for today and what we'll be talking about, we're really focusing on our financial productivity suite up top, which now Iridium is part of and makes a big part of that productivity suite. And Tom will touch a little bit on Iridium. We have some document production tools that allow us to help firms get a bit more efficient in the way they create documents, present themselves externally. Our business productivity is really focused on firms being able to pitch and try and win new business. And ultimately, what we're probably most known for, and a very large part of our business, is our people productivity, which is really focused on workflow and moving work around the firm at the front office level, lawyer to support staff, associates, etc. And also a new and big and exciting part of that portfolio is our resource management, which is really around making sure that we're staffing appropriately and staffing the work that the firm is doing. So as you can probably see from a holistic perspective, the reason we have this in a circle is really a lot of these intertwine with each other. You know, you can't have good financial productivity unless you're staffing your matters correctly. You can't really staff or do work properly if you haven't won the work, right? So that's where the business productivity comes in. And then really you can't organize and present yourself externally without having proper document tools. So really sort of the way these all kind of tie together. And as we said today, we're going to be talking around the findings around pricing, profitability, business intelligence, and analytics. That's what we're focused on in the financial productivity suite. And a lot of the results from today through the survey that we did, you'll see are really going to hone in on some of the specific areas that you can improve on. And towards the end, we have a download slide where you can go and download that, download the full report. We're touching on probably less than a quarter of some of these findings. The report's well over 60 pages and has a ton of useful information in it. So with that, I will turn this over to Tom to talk a little bit about Iridium and the acquisition. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Rob. So Tom Jones talking to you from Reno, Nevada. And Iridium Technology, it's a company that I founded about 12 years ago. And our initial focus was just business intelligence for law firms, period. But we did a couple acquisitions and we moved into timekeeping and budgeting and forecasting and partner performance. We're very excited to be part of BigHand and for several reasons. One is Rob and I used to be frenemies, competing against each other, but respecting each other. And it's very exciting now to be working with Rob to go out there and solve problems for our clients. Also, it's very, very awesome. We now have 81% of the AmLaw 200, 3,600 clients worldwide, and 82% of the UK top 200, over 300 employees. And for me, the cash flow survey is just a perfect example of why I'm happy to be part of this team. BigHand has an incredible marketing department. If you take away one thing from this discussion today, it is to click on that link at the end and download that survey, because the quality of the production is just fantastic. So I'm proud to be part of the BigHand team and proud to be here presenting today with Legal IT Insider.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. You want to touch a little bit on this? Or you want me to jump on this one?
I think Carolyn covered most of it, but I'll just say that this was a rigorous survey, more than 800 responses, and really, from all regions. Also, there's a couple other non-North America and UK, but this is statistically significant, and you can read this report and make some decisions based on it.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more, Tom. And I think one of the things I would add to that is, this is the second year we've run this report, and we're obviously, with our intention to continue to run this report annually and get as broad a spectrum as possible. And over time, we'll start to be able to introduce trending around some of the findings. And I think one of the things as we go through this particular version of the report, I like to talk about context as we get into some of the actual findings. And I'll let Tom speak to this slide, but one of the things that keep in the back of your brain, as we did this in about August, the August-September timeframe of last year. So we were still in the throes of the pandemic, but so some of these numbers will seem inflated, but I think if we add some context to what was happening, you'll start to see and start to sort of be able to understand where some of these numbers ended up. Go ahead, Tom.
And these are really the key topics that we'll be talking about today. It's basically about how you can reduce your age WIP, your age debt, and overall reduce that lockup and exposure and get that money working for you. Looking for areas with cash flow leakage, write-offs, write-downs, and also just slow collections. One of my favorite topics is basically having your law firm have a commercial culture, or a culture where profitability is part of the discussions, not only during the proposal, but during the execution of the work and during the collections process, that people are being made aware of that and the impact on the firm profitability. And also in many cases, firms are moving towards rewarding people for having the right behaviors there. And then finally, another hot topic for me, visibility of financial data. Doesn't do you much good to have great data in the background if you're not pushing it out to your lawyers, your partners, to the managers of your practice groups. So getting that data in front of the people so that you can hold them accountable and they're able to make informed decisions.
Yeah, no, that last point is probably one of the key takeaways from a lot of the conversations I've had with firms over the last few years. So with that, I will start with leakage, some challenges and solutions. So what we tried to accomplish with the survey as well is not only are we gathering information to sort of inform, sort of the legal market, if you will, about some of the challenges y'all are facing. So, I mean, some of these are going to be fairly familiar because as we went and surveyed folks, and as Tom said, this is, 800 respondents. This is a highly statistically valid report in the sense that We've got a good pool of people we're talking to across a broad spectrum of sizes of firms. We did try and focus on about 100, 75 attorneys and up type thing. So this is this covers a broad spectrum of firms as well in terms of size and geography. But what we tried to do is we sort of asked, what are your challenges? And then coupled with that, it's great to talk about the challenges, but we also wanted to ask, and what are you doing about it? So one of the things that you're going to see today as we start to go through these slides is we're going to present a challenge or two and what firms are experiencing and what firms have decided or thought about doing to try and solve those. So hopefully as we go through this conversation, you'll start to see, hey, this is an area that needs improvement, and here's what we think we're going to be doing about it. Now that's on a lot of the more tactical stuff, and there's some stuff just generally that we'll talk about as well. So as a reminder, pop your questions into the chat window, and Carolyn's monitoring that for us. So as they come in, we'll be sure to jump on those. So I'll start with what contributes to profit leakage, and I think probably for most firms on the phone today with us, on the webinar, I should say, would sort of agree with all of these, but I'm going to zero in on a couple of them that I think are worth sort of calling out. The general stuff, what we talk about when we talk about leakage is anything that is within your control as a law firm to actually improve upon, right? So there's certain things that are going to happen that are outside of your control, but there are elements of your process, elements of what you do as a law firm that are well within your control. And so if you look at the one in the middle at 28% around missing or late time entry, that's something that's well within the firm's control, right? Can we have our folks get better at putting their time in? I read something recently, we did a webinar a couple weeks back where a colleague of mine was talking through a report that, the longer you go in entering your time, if you miss it by a day, your ability to recoup the time that you enter is diminished by about 5%. If you miss it by 2 or 3 days, that goes to 10% and so on. So the idea is the longer you go by, in terms of getting your time in later, the less likely it is you're able to recoup the entirety of that time. And that's something that's well within the firm's control, right? You can put things in to mitigate late time entry. Another one that it really jumped out at me is a third of the respondents talked about, underpricing work, and that's sort of tied to the one above, really about lack of matter budgeting. The idea that you go into an engagement and you don't, you go into an engagement a little bit blind and undervalue your own work to your client, and on top of all of that, not actually wrap a parameter around the work like budgeting, contributes massively, right? If you think about what can happen if you're underpricing work, obviously you've left money on the table, and if you're not budgeting properly, the ability for your client to push back on overrun, to push back on scope without having a proper budget in place, you're really not able to engage in that conversation with the client and actually have a meaningful discussion as to why something may have gone outside of the budget or why something is priced a certain way. So sort of two things that sort of are intertwined, but a third or almost 30% have said these are issues that contribute, and the recognition that they contribute is sort of half the battle, if you will. And if I go to the next slide, what are we doing about it, right? I think that was sort of the second half of this is, and they're obvious, hey, get better at improving time. But I think the fact that there's a recognition that these things lead to leakage, and the flip side to that firms are saying, look, we need to get better at this. And, if I look at the time entry one as an example, a good quarter of our respondents have said, we're going to get better at that. And there's a variety of ways in which you can get better at that. There's implementing process, there's implementing, pretty good time entry software that sends out reminders and things of that nature, or allows or helps the attorneys get their time in an efficient manner. But again, this idea that recognizing the problem and then trying to solve it. And I like the one at the very, very bottom there. Again, another quarter of the respondents said that they're going to be looking at the write-off and write-downs process. And again, if you think about what the problem was on the previous slide, it ties directly into, why are we writing time off? Chances we're writing time off because we either didn't budget properly or didn't set about a proper or initial price for the work that we were going to do, and the client has come back and said we're not paying for that. And again, if you understand that front process correctly and try and solve it, you can then start to put things in place to solve the problem. And again, we talk a little bit about putting systems in place. Before I turn it over to Tom for the next section, Tom talked a bit about visibility, and we have a whole section on that towards the end. But again, having the ability to see this stuff and have it presented to you and the visibility into all of these things, whether it's time entry, write downs, your rates, budgets, whatever it is that you're engaged in from a financial perspective with your client, visibility internally to the stakeholders is a massive step forward to solving some of these problems. The old, I forget the exact phraseology, but you can't, measure what you can't see, or whatever the expression is. I'm sure Tom will correct me. But this idea that visibility is key. So before we go to the next section, Carolyn, so far so good. Any questions? Anything coming in?
Well, I was just going to ask you, so do you think, so law firms obviously historically have been pretty terrible at just sort of, it's sort of like the kind of finger in the air in terms of how to price a matter. So, but obviously that's, it's avoidable now, but so why do you think firms haven't been quicker to, do you think there's sort of issues in terms of them using data? What's the sort of issue in terms of them using data to really assess how they should price a matter?
Right. That's an interesting question, I think, and I'll let Tom jump into if he's got a thought here on this too. I'll start by saying I think you can segment the market into 4 quadrants. I think let's take geography for a moment. There is a distinction, and we have the fortune to sort of work on both sides of the pond, and there's a slight distinction between our friends in the UK and our friends in North America in their approach to pricing. So the folks in North America, it tends to be a more centralized function. It tends to have a bit more process around it. And that's not to say what's happening in the UK is not appropriate. It's just there's a slightly different angle in which they attack the problem. And then if we sort of draw a line up and down, firm size matters when it comes to something like this. The larger the firm, the more they try and get their arms around this and add more of a centralized function around it. And the smaller the firm, the more ad hoc. So that if we look at it that way, and then if I sort of answer your question more directly, there is this idea that, I'm a lawyer, I do understand the work that needs to be done, and I don't necessarily need all of this stuff that you call data to make that decision. But to be fair, I think that is shifting. I think firms are, I've said this before, we're moving out of the education phase of this particular problem at firms, and we're moving into the doing phase, meaning for the last 4 or 5 years, Tom and I have been out there, telling people you need to use data, you need to budget properly, et cetera, and sort of almost educating the market getting there. And you've got all kinds of organizations now that have started around that. So I think we're seeing a shift. Probably didn't answer your question directly, Carolyn, but I think we're seeing a shift. And I think size and geography play a big part.
I do remember I used to be a lawyer, and that not billing your time, my goodness. I'm getting to the end of a day or 2 days just going, oh my goodness. How do you account for every 6 minutes?
Yeah.
Like just putting it down to memory is not enough. They need tools to help them do it, because you just physically can't remember every 6 minutes. And then,
Yeah, 100%.
I've got a couple of comments to add there. Is Carolyn, following on your comments, there's plenty of products out there that are monitoring the work that you do throughout the day, and will track those time slips, and you're not forced into it. You then get the ability to edit them and adjust them as you see fit. I'll say up there where it says missing or late time entry is one of the worst offenders. There's a corollary to that, and that is the quality of the narratives. And so again, there's tools that can help you with that, whether building the narratives in advance or screening them before they're submitted, and basically getting out the red flag items. Regarding the pricing, I have to share an anecdote. When Iridium went to do our first private equity transaction, I went to market. I wrote up a 10 or 12 page document saying, here's the transaction we're going to do. Here's all the nuances and aspects. How much do you want to do this? And we put that out to about 10 law firms. And the quotes that came back ranged between $40,000 and $800,000. And so I think the takeaway there is that there are some firms that are saying, hey, let's throw out 800,000 and see if he goes for it. And other firms who are, really putting some thought into that. My final comment on this one would be, your firm does not have to absolutely nail all of these things. Hey, let's get missing or late time entry down to 0. If you could reduce it by 5%, it has a huge impact. And so you can make some, let's say, low-hanging fruit moves on these various things to get some pretty significant changes for your firm profitability and performance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that last bit, Tom. You don't have to bite off all of this. You can pick and choose and get rid of certain ones. So the next section, challenges and solutions, specifically around profitability. So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, I'll start by saying both Rob and I have been working on the law firm profitability problem for 20 plus years. So it's near and dear to our heart. I'll say, looking at this data here, it's not surprising, and we've seen this in our client base. 64% have added their financial analysts since the pandemic began. And whether that's going from 8 to 9 or 0 to 1, it shows that firms are recognizing the importance of just having good data and understanding that data, and then being able to take action on that data. I think the ROI for a financial analyst is pretty compelling. You get someone on board, 150,000 US or something like that, depending on their skill set, and they're analyzing your $68 million business and spending their days trying to come up with ways to improve. You're going to get your money back out of that person, absolutely. The other point that I like here is 98% of firms are experiencing profit leakage. I'll say I'm actually surprised that there's so much honesty in this answer. I would have thought that there would be some percentage of firms that say, oh no, not us. You know, our systems are spectacular. We're not losing anything. So for everyone to actually be honest here and say, yes, we have a problem. What are we going to do about it? I like that.
Yeah, I agree on that last point too, Tom.
Now, 40% of firms have introduced lawyer remuneration or incentives to reduce billing write-downs. I'll say it actually goes further than that. We're seeing among our clients and among law firms we're talking to that they're actually working profitability into the compensation of their lawyers. And I've been a presenter at the ARC Profitability Conference for years, or actually the chairman. And I always start by saying, my first question is, how many of you are taking profitability and working it into your comp? And 5 years ago, there was like 1 or 2 tentative hands. Every year it's gone up. You know, I expect when we go to that conference in a couple of weeks here, that it'll be 60%. So I think that barrier has been broken, that it's actually fine. And whether that's to say, hey, we're kicking out this program, profitability is going to account for 10% of your comp calculation, or if the firm is mature and they have buy-in in their profitability statistics, it might be 40%. But to get those lawyers working towards maximizing firm profitability while delivering excellent quality service. So the focus can either be on the quality of your time entry, or reducing your write-downs as we see here, or focused on cash realization. But it all comes down to, it's really a focus on profitability.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Tom, do you have to be careful from a client perspective in terms of building in incentives? Do you have to be careful about how that's phrased so that it doesn't look like, obviously firms have to be seen to be very conscious of costs, etc. So do you have to be careful how that's sort of, you know, pitched, as it were, externally?
Oh, absolutely. And the metaphor that I'll go to is, if your stockbroker is incented to sell you certain stocks, you can bet he's going to pitch those to you. The same thing is there's obviously a spectrum or a line that you have to respect. Is the firm has to be ethical and has to be delivering high quality services while focusing on profitability. That being said, there's plenty of ways you can focus on profitability without crossing that line. And I'll say, overall, you're never going to see a law firm putting out their advertisement or, you know, doing a presentation saying, and we are the most profitable firm in New York or something like that. That's not what you're saying. But internally, it's got to be part of the discussions.
But actually, you know, they do talk about, so in terms of remunerating, you know, attracting the best people, right? It does have an impact. Okay, you know,
Absolutely.
obviously it's highly competitive. You know, now more than ever in terms of, you know, so actually it kind of will have potential an impact in terms of the sort of people that you can hire. We've actually got William. I don't know if I'm allowed to say your surname, so I'm just going to say William. Thank you for your question. I actually don't. I think maybe it got cut off. I'm not sure whether if you can just fill in the end of your question, that would be great. And then I'll read it out to the panel. But if you could just, I think it might unless it's just. I think if you could just finish, I think that maybe it got cut off. So if you could just finish that and then I'll read it out, that would be great.
While that's being typed in, Carolyn, the thing I'll add too is, this is, if you think about generally what we're talking about is, and you mentioned it, you know, sort of alluded to it earlier in the conversation around matter pricing and how, you know, how you approach it. At the end of the day, this kind of conversation around, you know, incentives and remuneration, et cetera, It's about having an open and honest conversation with your partnership, with the folks that are running the business. The reality is a lot of these things are tied to the overarching profitability and success of the firm, right? We're now talking about running the firm as a business, and as a true business owner, you need to be looking at different ways in which you can improve your efficiencies, improve, excuse me, what you're doing. So I think it's also, there's an element here of open and honest discussion internally amongst the partnership of where we're going and how we're getting there.
Let me read Ashley Williamson. It's an observation, not a question. So I don't know if you guys have got any comments on this. Thank you very much for putting it in the chat. So he says, budgets aren't popular in the UK. The scheme in court isn't seen to be working. Many lawyers still believe they should just get paid because they're a lawyer and the client isn't. There's also a huge gulf, in my view, between the contentious and non-contentious work and approach to pricing. Badly prepared budgets are very common, and time recording that is badly managed I see every day. Any thoughts on that, either of you? And then I've got another question to read out to you. So thanks for engaging.
I'll respond and say that Iridium as a company, we've obviously engaged lawyers on many occasions for various business transactions, and it's pretty clear whether the firm you're working with is, spending time on your budget or just throwing out a number. And for me as a consumer, I'm not going to give repeat business to somebody who just said, yeah, I'll do that for $58,000. I want someone who's going to break it down and justify that $58,000 and then have the billing match that. So the bar has been raised, certainly some firms can continue in that, but if your competition is putting out good looking budgets and sticking to them, you're going to be in trouble.
There's an expectation. Before we get to the question, Carolyn, I think, and I couldn't agree more with what Tom said. There is now an expectation amongst your clients. So if I look at the firms and who you're dealing with, the reality is if you took 10 firms on a panel, if 3 of them are providing clear-cut budgets, fantastic reporting, and really engaging in conversations with their clients and actually, to use the phrase, adding value to that relationship, the other 7 are going to be at a disadvantage. And as Tom mentioned, over time, it's not that they're going to fire you as a client, they're just not going to give you the new stuff. And all of a sudden that client goes away for you. So in the back of your brain as a firm and as folks engaging with the broader client set, you've got to think of what your potential competition or colleagues or whatever it may be are doing, because there is an expectation now on the client side for some of this reporting, some of this budgeting, and some of this interaction. Go ahead, Carolyn, sorry.
No, thanks for that, Rob. So, and we've got a question from Donna Davis. Thank you, Donna. So for those that do matter level budgeting, 1, do you have a materiality threshold, i.e. matters over 50K? And 2, do you find it a useful tool and attorneys use to monitor throughout the project work?
We'll start, Tom.
Yeah, sure. I'll agree that firms are not going to say, hey, every single matter, is going to require a budget. So firms do set a threshold, even though we do have a couple of clients who say every single matter. But I think the general trend would be towards setting a threshold. Do you find it a useful tool attorneys use to monitor throughout the project work? And I would say it depends on the attorney. If you roll out a project and you say, hey, this is awesome, while the work is being done, you can track where your 10% and which phases you've gone over. Half of the attorneys are going to say, oh, this is awesome. And the other half are going to say, I'm not really interested now. I'm just going to do my work and get it done. And, things always work out. But again, I'll go back to my prior point. Heck, if 50% of your attorneys or even 25% were actively monitoring how they're performing versus budget and where they're going over in phases, and more importantly, sharing that with the client and saying, hey, it looks like on discovery, we thought it was going to be 80,000, but it's going to go to 120. And here's the reason why. And to say that early on, or, hey, we got a decision. Do you want to go deeper on this discovery or just call it good enough? Rather than just at the end saying, hey, here's your giant bill, 40% more than you expected. That's going to go over well.
To be honest with you, to me, it's incomprehensible, right? Like in terms of how we interact in our normal lives, to me, it's incomprehensible that firms are still doing that there would be any level of acceptability over not having an idea what something's going to cost and then just being presented with, like, it doesn't happen in any other part of our life. And if it did, we would, I find it incredible. And I used to be a lawyer.
Carolyn, imagine if you went out to dinner tonight in New York and the
Right.
waiter comes up and gives you the menu and there's no prices on it. He says, don't worry, I'll just charge you whatever I feel like it. You know?
It is literally incredible in the literal sense of the word.
Yep.
100%. Before we move on to the next section, any last question before we jump into cash flow and collections? Because I think it dovetails nicely in what we just said.
No, that's great. Thank you. We'll just, yeah, crack on.
Although I have eaten at restaurants, Tom, where there's no price on the menu and it's usually not a cheap meal. So to that end. All right, so cash flow and collections and some challenges and solutions again, sort of talking about the problems and talking about the solutions. So I think again, you know, when we talk about cash flow and collections, what we're really talking about now is we've talked a little bit about sort of some budgeting and time entry and how do we sort of, as we're working the work, but now the bill's gone out the door, if you will, and now we're really talking about, you know, some of the things that impact that. And again, I'm glad to see that a lot of our respondents were open and honest with their assessment of their ability to sort of collect from clients in a timely manner. And again, I think that if I compare that stat to last year, this is quite a bit larger, and I'm willing to bet that last year in the timeframes in which we did this particular survey, that influenced this number a little bit. But at the end of the day, any delay in collection is an impact to cash flow, right? So even though that number is very large, the fact of the matter is there is challenges at times, and you know, more than half have experienced an increase in write-offs. And I think that's an interesting one. Again, if we go back a few slides and talk through how we may have ended up here, you know, you can sort of see a logical path of if I'm not budgeting properly, or potentially I'm not entering my time correctly, or I don't have good visibility into what I said I was going to do, all of a sudden, you know, to Tom's point earlier, what I agreed to or what we agreed to initially, if you come to me with a very large bill afterwards, I'm writing it off. And not to harp on the M&A analogy, but we had the very similar experience in our acquisition, in that, you know, the law firm came to us about 18 months later and the bill was significantly higher than we'd agreed to. So not only was it 18 months late, it was more than double what they had agreed to. So I think you can probably imagine the chances of us actually paying that bill in its entirety. And I think that is, you know, there's a lot of stuff that happens upstream that gets you to that situation. But what we're talking about here is, oh, go ahead, Carol.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Is this pandemic related, some of it, or not?
I think on the right-hand side, the fact that 94% say they've experienced delays, I think is probably a little bit related. I think businesses that, you know, firms that were sort of set up with a broad range of practice areas probably weren't as impacted, but certain businesses that were focused on, let's say, the hospitality industry, for example, early on were probably very dramatically impacted. So I think that 94%, if I recall last year, that number was closer to 70, but I'd have to go back and look at the stat. But I think the fact that it's almost, you know, 100%, which is a pretty remarkable number, I think probably has a lot to do with the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And
I'll share. I'll share. We're working with a firm in Chicago, and they have 0 write-downs and 0. Actually, occasionally they got a write-off, but they don't do rate reductions either. And the firm culture is, we have a lawyer. She's worth $600 an hour. No, she's not worth $540. She's worth $600. And she's good, and you're going to pay her for every hour she works. So when we give you that bill for 12 hours, don't say, hey, I only want to pay 8. And that is clearly communicated to the lawyers and to the clients, and it just works. And I got to say, they have to back that up by having the culture where, and the processes where the bills come out in their quality. So I don't actually have that thinking of, oh man, it just says 12 hours miscellaneous discussions. It actually is broken down, but that might be the epitome of how firms can raise their game. But you don't have to have some really poor statistics on this.
No, it's funny, Tom, and I agree. Like it all goes back to what we were saying before about having a process and visibility, and that upfront conversation, right? When you're setting the budget, or when you're setting the engagement and the engagement letter, and you're having that conversation with your client or your prospect, it's about clearly articulating. You know, if we use that example and take it, you know, person X, this lawyer is worth 600 an hour. This is why she's worth this. This is what she's going to provide to you. This is the value that we as a firm bring. This is the backup to that. And our guarantee to you is not only are we going to be able to provide that service, we're also going to be able to provide all the things around that to make sure that you are getting what we said we were going to do. We're going to provide you the reports. We're going to provide you the, to your point, the bill or the invoice that has clearly details what was done, and hopefully on the backside of it, the outcome is good for the client as well. But at the end of the day, it's about having a process, having, I've always maintained, and this is not just because we're a vendor in this space, but having the software governance around the processes that you're putting in place. And as Tom alluded to, having the people and the culture, he mentioned it early in the call, this idea of building a culture or a financial acumen amongst your staff, that they're thinking not only as a lawyer, it's funny, it's sort of left and right brain. You're thinking from a lawyer's perspective, but you also are thinking from a financial perspective, and you're thinking of the sort of the financial or the business side of providing legal services to your client. The services that you're providing, the legal. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So presumably it then becomes a slightly self-fulfilling prophecy. So the more data you have, the more accurate you are, the better the culture, the easier it becomes to be accurate, right? And the more you could say, right, well, that we priced that at that amount, and presumably it just you need that data in order to. So so sort of I'm repeating myself. Presumably it just gets better over time if you have good processes and good culture.
It's like anything, yeah. The better you are able to inform yourself, the better you're able to inform your client, right? So if you are engaging in good time entry practices, good management of your billing, good management of the data that's flowing through, Tom said it, good narratives, things like that. If you're doing those things, the next time you think about it, fast forward a year and you're negotiating with a client about a particular engagement, and they said, well, we don't think it's worth that. You can go back internally and go, well, for the last 10 that we did like this person did this is why we think it's this way. And here's how we're able to come up with that number. And you would be surprised, as we get this question a lot during our implementations and our stuff, you would be very surprised that an open and frank conversation about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen can lead to very successful results. I don't know, Tom, before we move to the next section, anything on that?
I'll just add to Carolyn's comment about the virtuous circle is all of these things are improving your profitability, which gives your firm more money to spend on associate salaries or a new BI system or a new financial analyst, which then raises the game even more, increasing your profitability even more. So it does all feed upon itself.
To quote the Lion King, it's the circle of life. So
you're going to sing? We were talking about bringing
no,
it's karaoke section.
We are not getting into karaoke. Sorry.
If anyone wants to join us and have a sing, come in.
Shouldn't even have said it. All right. So next section, visibility and data. In fact, it dovetails very nicely into as you mentioned, Carolyn, this idea of seeing the data and having better data in the virtuous circle, as Tom said. So with that, challenges and solutions around visibility and data. Tom, take her away.
Yes, so these are, it goes back to Carolyn's inconceivable comment. When I see statistics like this, it always I find it a little bit heartbreaking. Only 23% of partners and 12% of associates have access to their cash recoverability data or to their billing information. How can you possibly expect these people to manage the profitability or to do collections or to feel responsible for getting their bills out on time if they don't have this? And it's particularly frustrating for me because I've been a vendor of products that solve this problem for more than 20 years. So I'm going to get emotional here.
Well, you're right, Tom. It's these stats. I mean, there's no other way to say it than they're bad.
But like, what do you put this down to, either of you? Why is it so bad? Why is it so low? Why don't they get shown this data? Do you think it's because they typically haven't had it, or that's not the answer, is it?
I'll come back to just set in their ways. And keep in mind that our data set was typically firms with more than 100 timekeepers. So I can say the non-reasons or the things that are not committing or contributing to this is we didn't have enough money. The solutions that are available they're cost effective, they provide great ROI. So it really has to be something in either the culture of the firm management or the lawyers themselves who just say, hey, I refuse to participate in that kind of scheme.
Yeah, no, I couldn't, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more on that one either, Tom. I think, Carolyn, to your question, there is set in your way. There's like, I was going to say inertia, like there's just, we've been doing this forever this way. But I think if you take this slide and you go back to the last previous slides, we're laying out a case very clearly that you need, if you choose to and you want to improve profitability, improve, like, I'm not trying to sound crass here, but we're not running charities, right? We're a business, and we're trying to, do the best that we can do, not only by our clients, but by our company. And so if you choose to, it's all there for you. You can improve every single one of these areas, and that will absolutely boost your bottom line. And the first thing that you need to be able to do is take the owners of the business. If we're saying that only 20, let's round up and say a quarter of the owners of the business, so 3/4 have no access to the financial data. That makes no sense to me. You wouldn't run a corporation like that. So I don't know why, or a lemonade stand. Why are you running your partnership that way? And sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. I feel like I'm scolding. So I'll go to the next slide as
it's a sore point, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know this was going to be such an emotional webinar.
Yeah, exactly. Need a box of
We had
tissues.
Tom nearly crying.
Well, actually, here's where we turn the corner and say there is hope, because 70% of firms recognize that they need to do a better job on this. 70% have plans to get a BI solution in the next couple of years, and 83% have experienced delays in the clients settling their bills, again, just feeding into their pain. So again, I'll say this is the ray of sunshine coming through. There's solutions out there. They're cost effective. The lawyers will appreciate them. And again, 100% of your lawyers are not going to use these systems. There are still going to be people who are sending, who are sending an email to the head of finance saying, hey, can you get me a list of all of my clients who owe me more than $20,000? And the head of finance says, that's on the dashboard that we gave you 18 months ago. And all you have to do is click your mouse twice to get it. But if you have even 50% of your lawyers using the dashboard or the reports that you're generating or the automatic emails that come out every Monday morning saying, here's all your AR over 90 days, you can get some real nice improvements in ROI.
Yeah, 100%. What's a mouse, Tom?
Say again?
I said, what's a mouse?
Oh, yeah.
we get that a lot, right? The back, I mean, not to be funny about it, but I think Tom's right. You're not going to get 100% adoption, and I would suggest that your goal shouldn't be that, because you will drive yourself crazy trying to get it. You are going to have a section of your partnership that will either rely on a colleague or rely on a senior associate, or, to Tom's point, send an email out to the finance folks to get that information. But if you can get the majority of your staff, or a good chunk of your staff, looking at this, it goes back to this idea of building financial acumen and building a culture of financial awareness. That if you think of your associates on that previous slide, if I go back a slide, the associates one for me is an interesting one, because that is your future partnership. Those are the guys on the pipeline, the girls on the pipeline to become partners. And you want to start exposing those people to this kind of information, because they will eventually be the leadership of the firm. And so, the partners now, 23% get that higher, absolutely. But the associates, let's not forget about them, because they will be the folks at some point who take over the firm. And I think it's getting them instilled in thinking about this is a key, pillar to your financial success in the future. Any questions?
Thank you to the feedback. Apparently, it was a great mix. I don't know if I'm allowed to say your name. It's just host and panelist, but so thank you for the feedback. One of your favorite webinars, combination of personality and real life examples, and Rob's circle of life comment is going down well.
I will not be singing.
There's still some demand, Rob, for you to do a little bit of singing. I'm just going to say.
Sorry, Elton John nailed that.
It would improve the webinar. Don't be selfish. Presumably, this also building it into your process, right? So I think that it seems to me as an outsider, this is not my area of expertise, but you have to build it. If there's no process, as we know, it doesn't often happen. So presumably, you know, what firms increasingly have to build this into the process so that it's just naturally something that you go through a certain stage in terms of scope, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I'm not going to read the comment here, but I'll say there's plenty of vendors out there who have solved these problems for you. And it's a combination of, you need the right technology, you need the right applications, you need to train your people on how to use them and how to get value out of them. And, you know, quite frankly, you need to look at the people in your firm and say, we need to hire people who are open to these types of solutions and have that growth mindset to focus on maximizing profitability. I'll say one thing that's interesting is you can roll these types of solutions out iteratively, and there's also security controls on there. So back to Rob's example about the associates, you say, hey, the associates, we don't want them to have profitability information, but hey, let's get them started on utilization, and so that they understand that. And then later on, we can add in other things. And maybe the partners can't see the profitability of the different practice groups, but they can see their own profitability contribution, or they can see their profitability contribution versus their peers, but the peers remain unnamed. So they can't actually say, oh man, I really did a whole lot better than Rob this year. But they can look and say, hey, I was middle of the pack, or I was an all-star achiever. So the solutions are out there, and your firm should embrace those, and then make sure that you're giving people the appropriate training and support that they need.
Yep, no, I agree 100% on that. Not much more to add to that one. And I think just very quickly, for those who did the big reveal at the end, if you will. So the report is available for folks to download. We've, you know, if you scan, if you're on your computer, if you take your phone and scan that code on the bottom, plus everyone will be given an email follow-up with a link to download as well. You know, we've tried to package it up in the sections that we talked about. There's 7 large sections, or excuse me, 6 large sections in the report. And on the right hand side here, we've created a couple of one-pagers that if you're on this webinar and you're thinking about approaching, you know, senior leadership or management, if you're in management yourselves on the webinar and you're thinking about these things, we've created a couple of one-pagers that you can include in some of the conversations with your peers and colleagues at the firm to talk about some of these important topics and some of the key statistics. So, Carolyn, any more questions flowing in?
Rob, I'll just grab the mic here for a second and say, there's a couple ways you can look at this report. First of all, if you open up the report and you don't know what the numbers are for your firm, then you need a BI system. Next is if you actually have a BI system and you have all these numbers at your fingertip, it's very nice to see what other firms are doing and how you compare and where you are in your journey. So everyone, push that button, scan that QR code, get that report.
I think that benchmarking is really important, right? Like that's another thing that you know, everyone should be aware of how they compare to their peers, and that's presumably that's a potential call to action as well.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, William, for your comment. Thank you. It's been a great way to finish off the day. We'll read the report with interest. That's good to hear. And I think, guys, is that it? I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you to everybody who's been listening in, and if you're listening live, I think so. Obviously, do the QR code. We'll provide email contacts. If you are struggling for how to get a hold of the guys, just email me and I'll put you in touch, Caroline@legaltechnology.com. But there's lots of different ways to get in touch with them. So I think is that it? I think that was a great presentation. Thank you.
We're just waiting for you to sing, Caroline. We're just waiting.
You know what, Rob? I'm just going to say it's a little bit selfish not to sing, but you know, I can. Okay, guys. Look, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, guys. Real pleasure. Click on the report.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.